This is one of those subjects that tends to remain on a perpetual simmer throughout the YouTube communities whom it concerns. Take a perusal stroll through nearly any of the medieval arms and armor channels, and you'll inevitably find almost every single one has put in a good word on the subject of authentically outfitting a D&D-style adventuring party. But unless you're brand new around here, you'll have noticed that I'm not one of these channels, even though my personal interests do occasionally overlap with their material niche. But being the topical mercenary that I am, I'm going to take a slightly alternative route towards the same objective. By that I mean, I'm going to attempt to fully model a medieval adventurer, not just clad a man in a medieval wardrobe and tell him to go fight the building-sized dragon with a longsword, which would be the equivalent of a field mouse trying to slay a lion with a sewing needle. No, this won't simply be another speculative monologue about what weapons a fantasy adventurer may choose for his or her escapades. Nor will I only look at what clothes and gear they may or may not have available, as there's far more qualified people than me to discuss that from a historical perspective. Instead, my net will first capture what, on the whole, sets an adventuring party apart from other wandering factions such as a knightly order, a bandit gang, or a mercenary company. Then we'll work backwards and deduce what they might use from both a low and high fantasy perspective. Now, why do I say low and high fantasy and not simply medieval? Quite simply, it's because in order to have adventurers exist in a world, there needs to be fantastical elements like magic and monsters. Reason being that these will be how an adventuring party distinguishes itself from a generic band of loose cutthroats, sellswords, or warrior monks. Quite simply, they are the tactical version of a trump suit, which, no, is not a reference to the current president. It's the name for the highest valued set of playing cards in a deck, i.e. the ones that tend to trump all others when put into play. In medieval times, this would have been in tarot sets, or as they would have been known back then, a trick-taking set. Nowadays, it's an anachronistic reference to the royal suit, the king, queen, jester, and ace. As anyone who's played a mid to high-level D&D campaign, or really any other RPG for that matter, can attest, the adventurer is the fantasy equivalent to a sci-fi super soldier or a comic book superhero. But unlike those caped wonders or hyper-lethal vectors, an adventuring party is a factorially multiplied force. Instead of a single being soloing entire armies, a party takes a set of individuals, each with a particular set of skills, traits, and/or abilities, and magnifies them through the use of coordinated strategy. The reason why this concept only stands out in a world of magic and monsters is because, in a strictly realistic setting, there'd be no reason why any of the other groups I mentioned couldn't employ similar methods to achieve the same results. So, here's where we come to the meat of the matter. The reason you would employ an adventuring party rather than a mercenary cohort or appeal to a chapter of Holy Knights for aid, apart from them being probably cheaper and/or less particular about the morals and ethics involved, is either because A, they have access to some esoteric knowledge, or perhaps some lost or ancient or novel technology, be it chemical, magical, or mechanical, that you and the more conventional forces at your disposal don't. B, because they all have superhuman abilities which magnify their effectiveness beyond what a normal force could achieve, or C, they have simply perfected their small unit tactics to such a point that they can reliably fight on par with numerically superior forces and thus make themselves a viable competitor in an economic sense, which is where the concepts of adventurer ranks and classes enters the discussion. For while all may be valued for their ability to compete, both in the steel and the gold departments, not all adventuring parties are created equal. Inevitably, once they get a suitable reputation for being better than all the rest, people are going to start copying, imitating, and passing themselves off as adventurers, even when they're just garden variety thugs or men-at-arms. Thus would there then come the implementation of adventurers' guilds, ostensibly to help people distinguish the royal flushes from the full houses from the 7 to offsuits, but in actual fact to control the spread of competing SWAT, special weapons, and tactics bands, and to help the nobility, gentry, and aristocracy rake in a cut of the lucrative monster hunting market, which is ultimately what all medieval guilds, as well as all such market-pinching outfits through to the present day, were really all about. Power and money, operating beneath the veil of altruistic social regulation. Like I said in my How to Ninja miniseries, contrary to what our modern feel-good consumerist candy culture wants us to all believe, what makes a man is not just the cut of his jib or the metal in his mustache. No, it's the steel all over the rest of his body. Basically what I'm saying is that pretty much anywhere, anytime throughout the course of human history, what was on the inside didn't matter a single fairy's plucked eyebrow hair if you didn't have the external materials to put it to work. And just as how the medieval knight was the avatar of death to anyone who hadn't been trained to kill since age 7, the fantasy adventurer would take the same pair-bonded skills and armaments and bolster them still again with an exaggerated corporal build. Whether this would be owed to a magic potion, a magic spell, a freak happenstance of natural genetics, or their mothers reinterpreting the classic maiden abducted by dragon tale into a book-talk version of Beauty and the Beast. And here's the thing. Those of you who saw my video breaking down my view on what an actual super soldier build would look like stats-wise, were I inclined to make such a thing may or may not recall my offhandedly mentioning that the degree of difference between a regular war hero and a genuine lord of the battlefield is actually a lot narrower than you might think. So far as I can see, you'd really only need to enhance the warrior's endurance, and not even by all that much. Maybe about 30 to 50% beyond the level of a trained athlete, and augment their perception so they could always see the enemy first, and they'd be all but unstoppable. Everything else could easily be covered by their equipment. For an easy example of what I mean, go watch Adorea's Night of Hope video. It's essentially the Kingdom Come Deliverance version of clearing a bandit camp in Skyrim. The only thing keeping it from truly crossing the border into realism space is that the MC is able to fight at full force for over 20 minutes in full plate harness, which, if you watch a professional boxing match and see those guys in nothing but shorts and gloves get completely gassed in under 5, you'll have some appreciation for why I consider the Knight of Hope to be superhuman. Of course, that all only applies to regular human enemies who aren't as well armored, armed, and equipped as their societal debt collectors. At the risk of starting another 100 men versus guerrilla debate in my comment section, even the ragtag cannon fodder from the Knight of Hope could have handled a lone assailant if they'd swarmed him as a coordinated pack. Just a few of them holding his attention with polearms or even long sticks and crossbows, while a few more scrambled around his backside and dogpiled him, then stabbed through the crevices of his armor. Granted, I realize this would still be easier said than done, but my point is that, at the end of the day, his uncommon vitality notwithstanding, the titular Knight of Hope is still just a single, well-protected human. However, if his constitution was further bolstered by a concealed cleric, his armor bolstered by an alchemist, and his weapons enhanced by an artificer beforehand, and were he also being covered by an elite ranger and/or ninja assassin who could keep the enemies disarrayed with smoke and fire, then you would have all the constituent components of a real adventuring party. And indeed, by the standards I laid out a minute ago, you would only need a well-trained shield pair of adventurers to equal a band of loosely choreographed vagabonds. But you might think, what if their enemies have magic and alchemical boons too? After all, many bandit camps in video games have renegade mages and necromancers and the like helping them. So would it not also stand to reason that some royal faction, mercenary company, or necromantic cult would have access to these things also? Well, sure. In the same manner as most would have had access to swords and crossbows as seen before. However, just as in real history, here's where the Adventuring Guild itself comes back into the picture. You see, the benefit of being attached to any sort of official outfit or institution is the raw scale and resources they can offer. Not only would a membership in the AG supply the party with the necessary facilities and equipment, alchemy labs, enchanting tables, ingredients, workbenches, etc., to enhance their combative performance above even what most kingly retinues would have, they would also afford the requisite network to connect all these various individuals not only with each other, but with their clients. All the while collecting their guild fees in the form of coin, contributive labors, and invaluable experience. An undersung advantage to which is that the AG could and would be unisex, since the application of non-physical attributes to combat would mean that both men and women, and possibly even children, could equally take part in the casual slaughter of the alien, the mutant, and the heretic. And in this way, it wouldn't surprise me if you saw the development of whole adventuring clans, similar to how the ninja and Vikings were professional lineages of elite spec ops units and explorers. A young couple could get a financial boost by ridding the local cemetery of its ghoul problem or cleansing the regional woods of a bothersome vampire. It would also offer a lucrative outlet for people whose status might otherwise have locked them into a dead-end spiral. Widows, orphans, bastards, spinsters, etc. People whose only other options would historically have been to turn to banditry, begging, or prostitution to avoid the swing of the Darwinian gavel. But I still hear you asking, what about the dragons, though? Another perk of being a part of the Adventuring Guild is that it's like going to Witcher School at Hogwarts. Each time an adventurer completes a quest, they'd be required to fill out an after-action report, sort of like how our police and military forces do nowadays. This would then be entered into the Adventuring Codex, a massive tome filled with every lived-through encounter that branch of the guild ever had. That book, as you can probably guess, would be kept as securely as any bank vault or church reliquary. Anyone caught so much as looking at it without written permission would be more than likely killed on the spot, and the person who did the slaying would receive an honorary protectorate badge. And should this guild tome ever be stolen, the person who returned it, whether they be a guild member or not, would be entitled to a handsome monetary reward from the personal account of the guild master who allowed the thing to be stolen. Now, if I'm being completely honest, I'd started into this thing thinking that book's contents, specifically the parts on dragon hunting, would be this video's barycenter, if not its greater bodily mass proportion. However, in a turn that should surprise absolutely nobody who's been in these parts for more than half a flicker of a fairy's dainty wingtip, the more I started critically examining that side of the coin, the more I was convinced that to cram it into the sidebar or closing paragraphs would be like adding the BFG into a Doom game as a DLC item. So I'm going to be leaving that off for a future video that I'm working on parallel to this one, so that hopefully won't be too long in coming from your post-upload perspective. But in either event, until that time, you all know the drill. Like and subscribe, join up as a member, or check out my books. I also just activated my Patreon account I've been sitting on for about 6 months a few minutes before I started recording this, to which a link will be in the description box as well. And with all that said, until next time, my friends, as always, stay safe, stay sane, and always remember, you can never think too much, you can only think badly. Peace be upon you.